Made It to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 44. Pretty Little Kitten. "Sarah!" Damon shouted at the top of his lungs, his feet stomping across the room and over to Sarah, who was sitting on their bed, her nails stuffed into her mouth. Meanwhile, a smile slowly blossomed on her lips. He had just came back from searching all the rooms on the premises, and yet he still couldn't find what he had been searching for all this time. His favorite black shirt. It was always placed at the front of his closet where he could always see and find it. But for some odd reason, it was now nowhere to be seen. And, seeing as there's only one person living in this house besides himself, he was more than positive that she was the culprit. "Where did you hide it?" Damon asked in annoyance, his hand reaching out and plucking her finger out of her mouth to grab her utmost attention. "You seriously think I'd hide your shirt? I really don't have it, I swear." She held her hands up in surrender as she denied his accusations, yet the guilty look on her face greatly contradicted her words. Damon narrowed his scrutinizing eyes and folded his arms across his chest. He was getting highly irritated by the fact that she had gotten so accustomed to him that she even felt the need to lie to him and laugh about it. If it was in another situation, he'd probably think she looked a teeny-weeny bit cute. But right now, this was a grave matter, and as such, those lies she had going on there needed to be put to a stop. "Why are you laughing?" He continued to interrogate her with a bored yet annoyed expression, though in truth he was struggling to keep up with his nonchalance. Her smile was becoming contagious, so contagious that he felt the need to smile whenever she did. Sarah, on the other hand, tried her best to retract her smile, but could not do so when Damon was staring down at her like that. "I'm not laughing, I'm smiling," she corrected. "It's funny to see you so disturbed just because of a shirt you wore for 2 days. 2 days straight!" Damon frowned. She said it as if wearing something more than once was a crime. From what he knew, it wasn't. And this would have made it his 3rd day if she hadn't hidden it out of sight. "That's not your business. And it's not just any simple shirt. It was made by the most famous— Yeah, you already told me that," she pointed out, laughing as if she was on drugs when he glared at her. Nowadays, his deadly glares seemed a lot like puppy dog eyes to her. She wasn't fraught with worry whenever he looked at her, and at the moment, he barely even seemed intimidating. "Will you continue searching for the rest of the day? Do you need my help?" "Help from the perpetrator," he gave her a flat stare. "I told you I didn't hide your shirt. Do you think I have time for such childish things?" "Is that even a question? Hurry up and hand me my shirt before things get messy." He uncrossed his arms and outstretched his palm toward her, his fingers gesturing for her to pass it over. "I'm serious." Sarah slapped his hand away and crawled further up the bed, her eyes dancing with mischief that she knew would probably lead her in trouble's direction later on. But she'd take the risk if it meant playing with Damon just a little. Ever since 2 days ago, he had been cooped up in his office day and night. He mentioned something about work and piling up and needing to sort things out or something like that, but Sarah couldn't care less. What kind of office work could an Alpha King do anyway? Mark the register? She didn't see the point when he already had Jason to do everything. And even if he was going to work all day, then he could have slept in their room at least. But instead, he had stayed up all night doing whatever. And so, stealing his shirt was a last resort. That way, she'd get him out of his office without disclosing the fact that she missed his company. "What will you do? Bite my head off?" She countered his nonchalant words with a few daring ones of her own. Damon dropped his hand. His face remained as straight as always, until a few seconds later when a rare smirk covered his lips. "You think I can't?" I'm a werewolf, Sarah. I hope you haven't forgotten that.
For a moment I did, since you look so much like a pretty kitten.
Damon's frown immediately returned to its place and his jaw clenched. Kitten? I look like a kitten?
Pretty much, she nodded. I can't imagine what your wolf form looks like.
Damon struggled to contain himself upon hearing her belittling words. A kitten? His wolf form could even challenge a full-grown elephant, yet she saw him as a kitten? The brazenness of the woman in front of him just kept surprising him over and over. How dare she compare him to a kitten, or to anything at all? What the hell did she just say we look like? A kitten? Unbelievable! Liam's voice suddenly resounded in his head. He had stayed silent, listening to their amusing conversation until the word kitten popped up. As he was the wolf counterpart, his pride was definitely hurt more than anyone else's. Damon ignored his wolf and quickly addressed her disrespect. I do not look like a stupid kitten, he grumbled, eyes twitching in annoyance when her laughter started up again. Her mockery made him feel as if he was suffocating 100 feet underground. He was annoyed, very much so that he wanted to cover her lips with something, anything. His glaring eyes traveled down to her feet, and the brightest ideas crossed his mind. Without wasting any time, he swiftly lunged at her, grabbing both feet in his grasp. Sarah's heart plunged her chest up and down at lightning speed. She instinctually wiggled and writhed under his hold, but her attempts were left in vain. His hold was too strong for a measly human to break out of. What are you doing? Now it was Damon's turn to laugh at her. His lips pulled upwards and his teeth came into view as a low, rumbling laughter bubbled up his throat. Jason said you wanted to see my wolf form. I bet you'll regret saying that if I were to shift now. I'd bite your head off and drink your blood. Your wolf form? She repeated absent-mindedly. Her writhing stopped and her eyes suddenly became attentive as they filled with sparkles. This was certainly not Damon's intention. He was aiming to get back at her by scaring her a little, but it seemed his words and actions had the opposite effect. She wasn't the least bit scared. She looked rather excited instead. Slowly, Damon disappointedly released her feet and allowed her to rise to a sitting position on the bed. It looks like you didn't hear me well, he said, his face reflecting his bad mood. I remember telling Jason that I wanted to see his wolf form, not yours. But if you insist, I guess I'll have a look at yours instead. Sarah couldn't hold back an excited smile at that point. It was a shame she hadn't gotten to see Jason's, but it was quite fortunate that Damon had offered her a view of his own. She couldn't imagine what he'd look like when he changed. An alpha who's the king of all alphas? He must look exceedingly beautiful. Damon was taken aback. Humans were not this open-minded when werewolves make mention of shifting, so it was a surprise to see her act this way. Are you going to shift or not? Sarah asked, unable to keep herself sitting still. Her excitement would soon bubble over if he kept making her anticipate his impending shift. Fine. Damon took his gaze off her and pinned it to the floor. And before I do, you should know that I don't like it when others touch me. Admire from afar if you don't want to get bitten. Without waiting for a response, he took a deep breath and then shared control between both him and Liam. His bones were the first to start the change, cracking and rearranging themselves in different positions to accommodate his shift. The clothes of his body began to tear apart and replaced by his hair that started to elongate soon after while visibly getting blacker in color. He bent over in an odd way that made Sarah cringe, and then his nose narrowed into a snout and his body began to resize, enlarging to around 3 times the size of a full-grown human. And before long, A fully shifted wolf stood before her on 4 legs, mouth half opened as it breathed noisily. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 45. Pleasure Like No Other. Damon? Sarah's excited smile blossomed brighter than before as she watched Damon, who was now fully shifted in front of her. Her amazed eyes swallowed every bit of his appearance. His fur that was as black as a night, his eyes that were of a beautiful golden color, and his long, heavy limbs that looked 10 times stronger than in human form. Sarah could do nothing but stare at him from head to toe, then from toe to head. It was the first time she had seen a werewolf shift so clearly, and you could say she was more than impressed. The wolf hoisted its head somewhat cockily as if howling, his beautiful fur flowing with a whooshing wind that escaped through the open windows. With itching fingers and a heart filled with nothing but excitement, Sarah crawled off the bed and made her way towards him on the top of her toes. It was Damon, so she was indeed wary of touching the ticking time bomb, but nonetheless, her feet moved onwards despite her worries. She was eager to use this golden opportunity to explore his whole body with her hands, and nothing could stop her at this point. "You're so cute," she complimented without thinking much about the grumpy person whom her words were directed at. Damon turned his head away at the sound of her voice, something that seemed to be a bored look forming on his face. He was already changed, yet Sarah understood his expressions so well. Wolves were indeed as impressive as she thought. "I meant handsome," she laughed, speeding up her pace as her wariness faded along with each step. Damon blatantly ignored her rectification and looked down at her feet, then back up at her repeatedly. In response, his eyes seemed to narrow into a glare, giving her a look that said caution. Sarah knew exactly what he was insinuating. "Come any closer, and you'll be in deep trouble." But Sarah paid that no mind. Damon wouldn't hurt her. She was so sure of it now that even if his glare looked as deadly as an oncoming meteor, she'd stay put. She was already used to this bluffing by now. When she stopped in front of him, her eyes were clouded over with sparkles. "Is it okay to touch you?" she whispered, yet she had no intention of even waiting for a response. By the time her full sentence left her lips, her palm was already sitting atop his head, patting and petting his fur in the most gentlest of ways. Damon, however, was certainly not pleased by her course of action. Or you could say he was half pleased and half annoyed. Petting him meant he'd purr like every other stupid wild animal around. And then, purring meant complete disgrace. He tried his best to hold back the dreadful sound that was threatening to escape him, but when her fingers scratched beneath his ear, he could do nothing but release it. As soon as he realized his drastic mistake, his golden eyes widened in shame and he instantly tipped his head back, his feet moving in a way that gave Sarah the idea that he was going to slip through her fingers and run off. But she wouldn't have that. Tipping up onto her toes slightly, she locked her arm around the humongous wolf's neck and swiftly pulled him down to her level, a victorious grin stretching from ear to ear when Damon groaned, but didn't try to break out of her hold. "Stay still, will you? You're so cranky." After a few silent seconds, she stretched her free arm up to run her fingers through his hair once again. But as she did so, the sound of bones cracking filled the air. It was pretty easy for her to gather that if his bones had cracked when he was shifting to his wolf form, then the same would happen when he was shifting back to human. She immediately frowned, her fingers gripping and yanking the fur on his head that was beginning to return to normal. And soon enough, she found herself latching onto the hair atop his head rather than his fur.
Seriously? Damon! She screamed in frustration, her fingers releasing its hold on his hair and her feet stomping childishly against the tiled floor. Seriously, Sarah? He mocked, rolling his eyes as he looked down at her. You shouldn't have touched me when I told you not to. You're just embarrassed because you purred like a kitten. Damon stiffened. The lack of reaction from her had given him the idea that she hadn't heard him, but unfortunately, it seemed that he was wrong. I did not purr. You did. I didn't. You did. I said I didn't. I said you did. Stop it, Sarah. Stop it, Damon. I'm serious. Who cares if you're serious? Giving him one last glare, Sarah turned around and walked off towards the door. Where are you going? Damon asked lazily, scratching the back of his head. When she didn't answer, he took 3 long strides forward and grabbed her by the arm. She shrugged. Jason's in your office, right? I bet he'd be happy to shift for more than 2 seconds. Unlike a certain someone. Damon's face distorted into one of annoyance again. He's gone. And even if he was still here, he wouldn't dare to shift in your presence. You're only allowed to see me naked, no one else. Sarah took in his words, one after another. Naked? She was so irritated by his behavior that she was not even aware of the fact until he boldly announced it. She twisted her head around warily, hoping and praying that it wasn't as she thought. But unfortunately, it was just that. His clothes had been ripped from his body during his shift, and now he was standing there with nothing on. Absolutely nothing. Everything from his head down to his toes were bare, even that huge private part of his that she did her best not to stare at for too long. But her best was not good enough, and she found herself staring at it for much longer than planned. Long enough for Damon to notice. I see you're finally silent. It looks like whenever I want you to behave, I'll have to give your eyes a taste. What? Sarah quickly snapped her neck in the other direction, her best ridiculous look on her face. I wasn't staring at... She gulped thickly and pointed at his lower region without turning her eyes to him. That? I was looking at the beauty mark you have on your thigh. I don't have a single beauty mark on my thighs, he answered almost immediately. You're pretty bad at lying, Sarah. He grinned, eyes staring down at her in amusement. He still found it a mystery how things like this could always make her shift to innocent mode, whether she's drunk, angry, or whatever. Don't you have things to do in your office? She grated her teeth together, her fingers clenching in embarrassment. Not anymore. And with that, he pulled her by the arm, causing her to twirl inward into his chest. Her cheek connected with his bare skin, and the heat of his body immediately disrupted the color of her cheeks, turning it into a bright red color. Since the situation is already like this, he continued, his hand releasing her arm so he could reach up and brush her hair out of her face before he raised her chin. Why don't we do something fun? I've been waiting for far too long, don't you think? Sarah tried to level her chin as well as her heavy breathing when she voiced her next response. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm sure you do, he smirked, catching her eyes so she could clearly see when his gaze slowly dragged down her body then back up, stopping at her pink lips that quaked slightly from nervousness. So Sarah, his fingers released her chin and crawled down her body, landing on her hips. His eyes that were glued to her hips never moved for a second until he made the move to sink into her warmth. His breath played with her lips mercilessly, and the warmth radiating from him slapped against her in a sensuous way, but he never connected their lips together. His body stayed dormant, just an inch away from hers. Sarah's fingers twitched. She was itching to circle her hand around his neck, then pull him down so their lips could connect, and as such, her hands felt heavily awkward by her side. "Can I touch you?" He pulled her closer to him by the waist, landing her flush against his body. He made sure she could feel the layout of his body against hers, as well as the protrusion between his thighs. "If you say so, I'll back off." He didn't get to finish his sentence because Sarah's soft, hesitant lips had already connected with his. To Sarah, it felt like forever. Forever since they had done anything so intimate. Forever since he had touched her. This chance should not, no, would not, pass her by. The fear of seeming desperate didn't cross her mind this time around. Besides, he was the one who initiated this. He was the desperate one, if you asked her. The kiss wasn't exactly passionate, soft and sweet. Both of them were hungry for each other, so of course they couldn't be satisfied with simply innocent kisses. The length of time they'd been spending apart was not common between mates. So now, every restraint that they had been forging were now tumbling down to the ground. And every emotion that they had bottled up inside had now broken free. Right now, they were both hungry creatures that were hunting for nothing but pleasure. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 46. Pleasure Like No Other, Part 2. Damon's tongue plunged through her parted lips and intruded upon her grounds, searching, exploring, wandering everywhere it could. Sarah's own tongue followed the lead of its master, twisting and twirling around his as moans of pleasure descended from her lips. His expertise in this particular area was astounding, and as such, his tongue down her throat could be nothing else but pleasuring. She seized the opportunity to push her hips closer to his, feeling his mighty erection pushing up against her front. Damon groaned deep in his throat. His hand that was digging into her hips slipped down to her ass, grabbing her flesh into his palm and kneading it as much as he wanted. His lips released her own while his tongue seized its assault on her mouth. He brought his gaze to hers, then licked her cheek with his warm tongue as his right hand descended lower than her ass, slithering down until it was underneath her dress and riding straight up towards her awaiting core. Sarah's lips parted, and a moan escaped her before he even embraced her lower area with his hands. The feel of him drifting so close made her whole body tingle with need. Her sense of shame left her in that moment. "I want you to touch me, Damon," she whispered. It was the first time she had spoken so clearly, especially in these kinds of intimate situations. Of course, Damon noticed that without a doubt. His lips spread into a somewhat cocky smirk. "Take them off," he demanded, his voice low and authoritative. Sarah immediately obliged to his wishes by unzipping the side of the dress and slipping it off her shoulders as swiftly as she could, gracing Damon's watchful eyes with a pleasing sight of her braless chest. She reached down for her underwear, slipping her fingers beneath the waist, but Damon grabbed her hand and repositioned it at her side before she could slide it down. He then took it upon himself to remove her last piece of garment. He slowly bent down so he could pull it down her legs, then off her feet, but even after it was completely off-body, he made no move to rise from his crouched position. His eyes, that were now in line with her crotch, slowly rose from her feet up towards it, taking in the sight of her nether regions with a tingle in his eyes that said nothing but lust. You smell so good, he complimented in that deep voice that made Sarah's insides shuffle delectably. Sarah stood on jelly-like legs, her eyes staring down at the man that was literally making her head spin. Her thighs drew closer together unconsciously when his face moved closer to her crotch. She knew exactly what he was going to do, but she was so out of it that she dared to ask that very question. What are you doing? Damon took a lick of her juicy flesh and rose his eyes to meet hers. I'm going to taste you, and then I'm going to fuck you. Then he dipped back in, this time with the intention of going deeper than before. He grabbed one of her thighs with his large hands, while the other relocated her right foot over his shoulder. Sarah immediately grabbed onto the wall in front of her, bracing her weight against it as her body waited the collision that would definitely make her see stars. Damon's fingers clenched harder around her thighs, and he took another long lick along her crotch. His tongue went from her tight entrance and traveled downwards, and when it touched her clit, he encircled the bud, licking, tweaking, and flicking it. Sarah's legs quivered from the sensations between her thighs. His tongue was doing wonders to her body, creating heat that was so delicious that she almost felt as if she was floating. Each and every lick, especially every twirl, made her whole clench with the desperate need for more attention. He was filling her with pleasure, nurturing a Sarah that even she had never seen before. And the worst thing was, she wasn't even in heat. She was desperate, so desperate that she even dared to grab onto his hair with her free hand, her eyes clenching closed as another wave of pleasure passed over her being. More! Please! Damon eased away from her sensitive clit to look up at her pleasure-distorted expression, and prideful feeling ventured through him. She looked so beautiful. Her hair was falling over her face, some sticking to her sweaty skin like glue, while others rebelliously flew in all directions. Her lips could not stay in one position steadily. The pleasure that he was giving her made them twist in all different kinds of ways, and moans and groans flew through her lips like sweet melodious songs, boosting him to pleasure her. Licking his lips, he dipped back in for more of her. This time, however, his tongue went for a stroll inside her entrance. His wet vessel dug in and out of her mercilessly, bringing forth pleasure that she had never felt before. Her legs felt as if they were going to buckle any minute. Her sole hand that was pressed against the wall was her only hope of keeping her standing. Sarah tightened her hold on his hair and pushed him deeper inside her core the best she could. But even so, she was not filled to the point that she wanted. She wanted him to go deeper, thrust into her harder, faster. Everything. She wanted more of it, and the only thing that could give her the excessive pleasure she craved was the rock-hard vessel between his legs. Damon? She whispered to him again, and Damon instinctively grinned. He knew exactly what she wanted from him, but taunting and teasing her was his goal for now. He hummed, his tongue drifting out of her hole and sliding along her flesh down to her pulsing clit. He latched onto it with his lips and sucked on the soft bud, his eyes locking with hers. A loud moan jerked through Sarah's being at the action, and she could feel the heat inside her hole as it clenched and unclenched. She was getting there. Damon could see it. He continued his torture, pleasuring her until he could feel her legs shake in his grasp, pleasuring her until she could speak nothing but gibberish, pleasuring her until that juicy liquid rained from her and into his mouth. He waited at her entrance and allowed absolutely not even a single drop to escape from him. He slurped everything into his mouth and swallowed her juice without any form of hesitance. He then slowly eased her leg from over his shoulder and connected his tongue with her flesh once more. He traveled all the way from her crotch up to her lips, his saliva leaving a wet trail behind on her skin. When he reached her plump lips, he immediately plunged his tongue down her throat, seeping her own taste into her mouth. "Should I stop?" he pulled back and asked, licking his lips once again as he watched her look at him through half-lidded eyes. "Or should I continue?" He pulled her closer by the waist, slapping their bodies against each other. Sarah didn't answer. In fact, she didn't even have the strength to. She brought one hand up and slid it up his chest, then onto his shoulder. The other, however, went in another direction, the direction of his erected shaft. Dropping her chin onto his shoulder, she latched her fingers around his rod. That was her answer, and Damon didn't need to struggle to understand. He grinned, his face moving in for a hungry, open-mouthed kiss. "As you wish." He held her wrist and guided her hand to his other shoulder, then he gripped her ass tightly and pulled her upwards, forcing her to lock her legs around his torso. "But," he continued, his lips moving away from hers and nuzzling inside the crook of her neck where her mark was as he began to walk towards the bed. "You do know that werewolves are needy creatures, right? Don't blame me if I push a little too hard." Sarah tightened her legs around him in response, her chest heaving up and down heavily. Her entrance still tingled with need at his words, despite having gotten a taste of pleasure already. She wasn't so sure to what extent the word hard went, but she hoped that it meant that he'd ravage her completely until she couldn't feel her own legs. Her mind, body, and soul was solely occupied by thoughts of sex and nothing else. So when she looked through the window and her eyes spotted a woman in red standing amongst the trees behind the mansion, her mind didn't register it properly. Or, you could say, her mind didn't register it at all in that moment. Sadly, she was so deep in the depths of pleasure that she even failed to realize exactly who those begrudging blue eyes belonged to. Katie. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 47. She's here. The Woman in Red. It's funny how, a few moments ago, you were so adamant on finishing your work that I even had to resort to confiscating that stupid shirt. But now, you don't even want to step a single foot out of the room, Sarah said as she looked up at Damon, who was hovering over her. He hummed at her words, an unruly side of his lips quirking up without his permission. "It's a must that I stay if you're offering me something I want." He dropped his head in the crook of her neck while making sure that his legs and arms held him up and prevented his full weight from embracing her. Sarah shivered at the contact. His breath was playing with her skin, and the tip of his shaft that was pressed against her stomach brought forth numerous images into her mind. They had just finished their little sexual moment, and she was indisputably tired as hell. But it seemed as if tiredness didn't stop her from craving more than she could even manage. Sarah's cheeks brightened and her wide eyes lowered its gaze to his muscular back. "And what am I offering?" Those wary-laced words were her failed attempt at sounding suggestive. Perhaps it was because she had recently opened the door to a more bold and wild-like relationship that made her so inexperienced with such things? Or maybe it was simply time for her innocent side to roll out. Anyhow, that was a stupid move. Before now, she had a feeling that she'd only disgrace herself if those words slipped from her mind and out into the open, but she braved up and spoke anyway. And now, She made herself into a stupid, spineless asshat. The chuckle that soon filled the air broke her away from her useless thoughts. What is it?" she asked. Her teeth picked at her bottom lip, and her hands awkwardly laid by her side. She was very tempted to shift to a more comfortable position, but could hardly do so when the stinging between her thighs was still at its highest. "That is exactly what I want to know," Damon told her, his tongue slipping out of his mouth and flicking over the skin where her mark was situated. "How far are you willing to go this time around?" His tongue stayed in the same place for a while, encircling and licking the sensitive skin, before it returned to its cavern and his teeth came forth, sinking without hesitance into her mark. Sarah couldn't resist curling her toes at the action. Damon had done it several times while they were having sex, and she was pretty sure he knew that she became a mess whenever he did it. It was no doubt that it was the exact reason why he was repeating his actions. "Damon!" she groaned, her lips parting as a distinct wave of pleasure shot through her like a course of electricity. She bared her neck to give him more access to her skin, and her hands that she had kept by her side had now bottled up the courage to relocate his hair. "Should I taste you? Or fuck you?" Damon's teeth retracted from her mark and raked along her skin, down to the rigid nipples that stood as tall as ever. His tongue immediately got to work, while Sarah relentlessly released countless moans into the air. Both! And once again, her innocence had parted with her. Not that she really cared in that moment. When her buds were as stiff as ever, he roamed downwards on her skin with his tongue and dipped into her navel, lubricating it with saliva. Then he eased back to look at her. Sarah's hand, that was still grasping his hair, forcefully pushed his head lower down her body as she churned and wiggled in pleasure. "Lower, please," she whispered, her petite hands directing his mouth towards her crotch. Damon grinned. He didn't waste any time in doing as what he was told to do, but just as his tongue was about to collide with her sweetness, his phone brightened up and his ringtone blared. Damon paused reluctantly, his eyebrows drooping in irritation. "Who the fuck?" Grabbing the phone from the bedside table, he first frowned at the caller ID, then answered the call. "This better be urgent, or else you're dead." "Rogues are loitering in front of the border. There's more than 50 surrounding the area," Maxim included. Jason's uneasy voice came from the other end of the call. "I'm sure you can deal with a few rogues. Why the hell did you call me?" "The weird thing is, they're not attacking. They're watching. This doesn't look good. What should we do?" Damon gritted his teeth, his eyes pinned on the woman delectably spread out in front of him. He wanted to finish what he had started, but the devil would not have it. Those annoying rogues better pray that his anger subsides before he arrived on the scene. Otherwise, he'd pluck each and every one of their eyes out, then he'd rip off their limbs one by one. "I have to go," he whispered, leaning down to peck her lips before making his way off the bed. Sarah's eyes instantly downcasted as disappointment scourged her. "I guess Jason can't handle it," she said, twiddling her fingers as she did her best not to make her disappointment spread to her face. "When will you return?" "What? Do you want me to stay? I'd leave Jason to die any day. Just say the word." She chuckled. "You'd let your best friend die?" "Who said he's my best friend?" He frowned, picking up his clothes from the floor and pulling them on. "I don't have such things." "You're doing it again." "What?" She grabbed the crumbled duvet and spread it over herself before sitting up in the bed, ignoring the sting between her legs at the arduous action. acting like you don't have emotions. I'm pretty sure you'd run off even if I tell you to stay." He rose a brow, his lips twitching smugly. "Does that mean you want me to stay?" "Doesn't matter. Hurry up and go before anything happens to Shorty." "Shorty?" His hands paused their movements while his eyes traveled over to her and narrowed. "You gave him nicknames and not me." "You're not exactly someone who looks like he'd appreciate a nickname." "Fair enough." He nodded and pulled his pants up his waist, buttoning it. "I'm off. Don't move an inch. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Despite Damon's words, Sarah inched off the bed as soon as he left and headed straight for the bathroom. She hadn't taken a bath since the morning, so she thought it was a good idea to take one before he gets back, and maybe put on that thong he brought her at the mall. Her face fired up at the thought. It would indeed be quite embarrassing when he returns, but she wouldn't think of that now. All thoughts could wait until later. She took a 30-minute cold bath and washed her hair, then returned to the bedroom. After dressing herself in the classy lingerie and the shortest dress she could find, Sarah walked out of the room, then down the stairs. Her stomach rumbled every 3 steps, enlightening her of the hunger that plagued her. Sighing, she stepped down the last stair and turned in the direction of the kitchen. She was hungry, and yet the only thing she craved right now was Nutella. That wouldn't satisfy her hunger even if she tried to feed on all 6 jars in the fridge. Maybe she was getting too obsessed with it for her own good. But it was understandable since she didn't even know that such delicacies existed before she even came here. Having Damon as a mate was definitely working in her favor. Now. In the end, he opted for a jar of Nutella, a bag of chips, a bowl of cereal, and a bottle of water. Grinning, she stuffed the Nutella and the chips under her arm while the rest were held in her hands. Then she made a beeline for the stairs, but unfortunately didn't get very far when the doorbell rang. She frowned. Obviously it wasn't Damon since he already had the key. And seeing no one else visited aside from Jason, she was sure that it could be no one but him. She unloaded everything onto the closet couch, then twisted around reluctantly. Scratching the back of her head frustratedly, she walked towards the door with irritation bubbling within her and quickly twisted the knob. "I thought you and Damon went—" She stopped her sentence midway when she swung the door open and an unexpected face greeted her. And it definitely wasn't Damon either. The person standing by the door was a woman. To be precise, she was the woman in red whom they refer to as Katie. Made it to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 48. Clash between the old and the new. Sarah's heart sped up, and the thoughts circulating around in her head pulled to a stop. Her blue eyes encircled her face, then pulled to a stop on another blue pair of eyes. Everything stopped, and the world was suddenly centered around the woman called Katie. Even the sound of wolves howling outside was drowned out into nothingness. Sarah could tell. She could feel it. She could see it. The resentful look in her eyes, the slightly scornful pull of her lips, and the aura of superiority that sparked in both the way she dressed and the straight-shouldered posture. This woman would be nothing but trouble. There was no doubt that Katie didn't like her one bit, and, similarly, there was no doubt that Sarah felt the exact same way. As she stared at the woman before her, one sole thought flashed through her mind over and over. Slam the door shut! That wasn't exactly what Sarah would usually think of, but the pool of emotions that swam through her was enough to even boost her up to pull every single strand of her hair out. She couldn't exactly confirm why or pinpoint from where she got the thought, but all she felt when she looked at Katie was jealousy, rivalry, and annoyance. Why was she even here? As far as Sarah knew, this woman was a betrayer, someone who Damon would kill in an instant if he spotted her, and yet she had knocked on the door to hell without even a pinch of fear on her features. What drove her here after all this time? By the way she was looking at her, she was probably sizing her up and examining each and every one of her features. So then, was she here to compare them both to see which was prettier? But if that was the case, what difference would that make? All she was doing was to get herself in trouble. Back when Damon thought she was a traitor, he was absolutely livid enough to watch her fall from the stairs with icy hazel eyes. Imagine what he'd do when he finds the actual betrayer standing by the door. Sarah wasn't sure what exactly had happened between them, but it was definitely something big. And though a part of her was telling her that Damon would probably rip her head off her body, another part was telling her that he'd do the same as last time. Run after Katie with those stupid, sad-looking eyes, and then leave her standing here with nothing to do and no one to talk to. That would not happen again. Not on her watch. "Are you the infamous Katie?" she asked hesitantly, her face drowning in embarrassment when Katie didn't even acknowledge that she had spoken. "I don't think it's wise for you to be here. Damon will be back soon." Sarah tipped on her toes and looked over her shoulder, her gaze sweeping over the forestry that laid in front of the house. Thankfully, Damon was nowhere to be seen. "You should probably go before he returns." "You." Katie suddenly spoke up and pointed a dainty finger at her as her penetrating eyes roamed up and down Sarah's body in what seemed to be disgust. Sarah immediately brought her fingers together, fiddling nervously with each one. Her voice was just as elegant as her face, so Sarah couldn't help but narrow her eyes in envy. How could one woman be so beautiful? And she even had the bright idea to wear that vibrant red that made her stand out. Once again, her lips, her shoes, her pouch, her dress, everything was red. And that, as well as her presence, was probably the most irritating thing she had ever encountered. "Huh?" Sarah finally answered, her brows slowly raising to a questioning height. Katie scoffed. "You look worse than I expected." Her eyes rose from Sarah's bottom half up to her face, and with a challenging look in her eyes, she lifted her 6-inch heels and stepped aside. Sarah knew what that look meant. Stop me if you can. Despite knowing that, she silently stood in place, eyes still glued to the spot where she was standing. "I can't believe I worried over nothing," Katie continued, each word acting as a piercing arrow through Sarah's flesh. "When I heard that Damon got a second mate, I thought I would never have a chance. But if it's you, I don't think I have anything to worry about." "I heard he got you from the dumps." She encircled Sarah with clicking heels and scrutinizing eyes that seemed to judge every single feature they spotted. "Let's be frank. People like you only want freedom, money, and sex. What if I told you that I could get you all of that? All you have to do is leave from Damon's sight completely." Sarah spun around, her body finally recovering the function to move. Everything Katie said just now was not on her expected list. Second mate? Leave? The words came out of Katie's mouth just fine, but when Sarah was to comprehend it all, everything just seemed to scatter all over her mind. What the hell was she saying? She had no idea what second mate meant, but the words alone gave her quite a vague idea. That idea, however, made her whole body pale. Meanwhile, in the pit of her chest, A rare feeling of utter repulsion and fury ruptured. I think you've got false information. I'm not interested in money, freedom, nor sex. What I want is for you to leave. Sarah reached a hand behind her to grip the knob and widen the exit. If Damon sees you, it probably won't be pretty. The words from Sarah left Katie in a taken-aback state. She paused for more than 10 seconds with her slightly wide eyes looking down at the woman, who she thought would be a pebble that she'd only need to step over. Now, she was having a different idea. Things wouldn't be as easy as she thought. But whether or not that was the case, she'd definitely have what she wanted. And that was Damon. Are you insinuating that Damon will hurt me? She scoffed, quickly regaining her composure. He would never hurt me. Not now, and not ever. Sadly, though. She stuffed her nail into her mouth and sized up Sarah with eyes that mocked her with feigned sadness. I can't say the same for you. Weren't you the one who he chained? It seems to me like he thinks of you as more of a dog than a mate. For Sarah, that was a very hard blow. Nowadays, she tried hard not to dwell in the past. Whenever she thought back to those times, she would do her best to busy herself so she could forget. And she had done a pretty good job all this time. But now, Katie was trying to tear open healed wounds, so it was only natural to waver at the mention of it. How do you know that? Sarah frowned. He had a reason for that. There's no other reason than he doesn't want you. You should leave before he breaks it to you. I admit, it'll be a hassle to slip into his life all over again. But it won't be very long before he tosses you aside and returns to my side. After all, I had him first, so it's only fair. You don't believe me? Why do you think he always specifically requests for sex slaves with blue eyes and black hair? He obviously couldn't get over me. It was only mere luck that allowed you to become his second mate. Sarah's right foot slid backwards when Katie's words slammed against the walls of her mind. What she just said was unbelievable, yet her mind considered it a possibility. She knew that she should have tossed her words out and countered with a few hard ones of her own, but all her courage seemed to deplete in an instant. And what replaced that courage was fear, uncertainty, and uneasiness. And that only triggered a series of what-ifs to run through her mind. What if all she said was true? What if he tosses her aside? What if he decides he doesn't want her when he sees Katie? It wasn't a secret that Damon was afflicted the first time he saw her at the mall. That longing look in his eyes. What if she hadn't mistaken it? Her thoughts were indeed ravaging her, and at that point, even her own skin felt as if it was suffocating her. Katie's eyes that seemed to dig into her soul made her want to run and hide in embarrassment. She had been doing fine for so long while holding her composure, but with just a few words, Katie had bowled her over. Could one be any more pathetic? After a long pause, Sarah swallowed her saliva in an attempt to get rid of the knot in her throat. I'd like to know what second mate means. It means I was his mate before you came along, Katie quickly informed with a seemingly prideful raise of the head. Sarah couldn't even find it in her to be surprised. After all, that was exactly what she had figured. It was something that was unheard of on her part, yet it sounded so plausible the more she thought about it. A ruthless alpha king who was said to have killed his own family couldn't possibly have allowed himself to be scarred by just anyone. It had to be someone who has even an ounce of power over him, and a mate was the only thing she could think of, as well as the only thing that made sense somewhat. So, Katie continued on. Her eyes attached itself to Sarah's form and narrowed in what seemed to be a predacious look. Then she turned her body fully in her direction and slowly approached her. "If you want to make this easier for the both of us, I suggest you go back to wherever you came from and Sarah was undoubtedly about to cower away and take a few steps backward. But before she could make herself out to be more pathetic than ever, Katie stopped in mid-sentence, her eyes strangely widening in horror. Sarah wasn't entirely stupid. Of course a midget like herself wouldn't be able to instill fear into a woman who had the aura of a raging lion. That meant that someone had probably arrived. Damon, or Jason. It was either one of the two or both. Never before had Sarah ever wished for Jason, aka the Chatterbox, to visit unannounced. Yet in that moment, she practically begged the heavens for it. Damon should never lay his eyes on her, or else things would definitely work against her. She could assume, and she could imagine, but the truth was, she had no idea what would happen if they met. At the mall, he fortunately didn't get to meet her, and this time around, she hoped that luck would work in her favor. Again. But as soon as she spun around in the newcomer's direction, her heart immediately sank to the floor. The person who was standing by the door was not Jason, but Damon Calesto. Made it to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 49. Damon going for the kill. Damon? The simultaneous call of his name made his body begin to itch. Before him there were two women, one of which was still knocking at his heart, while the other had slipped into his heart and wreaked havoc. How was she standing there alive and well? That was the first question he asked himself. And his first solution was hallucination. Just like that time at the mall, this could be nothing except that. But the harder he thought, the more implausible that sounded. It had been years since he had beaten himself up about her betrayal, and as such, it had been years since he experienced hallucinations. This woman could be no one but her, skin and bones. But what his mind could not possibly explain was her change in scent. She didn't have the scent of a werewolf. This was the scent of a human, a regular human. That could only mean her wolf counterpart had perished. But how? And was that the reason why he couldn't locate her all these years? No. How and why didn't matter. He shouldn't care about her wolf nor her. What he should care about, though, was the fact that she was standing in front of him, awaiting something that only he had the permission to give her. Death! She should know that betrayal could only mean death, yet she dared to show up here. She was asking to be killed, and he'd definitely grant her that wish. While Damon slowly caved into rage, Sarah was busy staring down at her feet. She didn't want to see it. The look on Damon's face, that is. She was sure that he was undergoing an inner turmoil right now, meaning he was torn between the two. It was either her or Katie, and from the looks of it, even she could tell what the answer was. Beautiful face, voluptuous body, and a strong aura to match his own. She didn't have all that. Katie did. The outcome of this dreadful encounter couldn't be any clearer. That painful conclusion made her head feel as if it was deteriorating. Her thoughts were taking such a dangerous course that she even began to imagine what would have happened if he had caught her that day at the mall when he ran after her. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten this far because he'd probably already be swayed by the mere sight of her. After all, she was only the second mate. That meant she'd always come in second, no matter the case. Back. Katie finally spoke, but Sarah wasn't sure if that was to be called speaking, since she barely heard anything other than the word back. Raw fear was evident in her voice, and the whole room could hear it when she gulped, as well as when her heels pushed backwards against the floor. back then, I didn't have a choice. I swear. Katie was standing by the couch now. That was pretty far from where Sarah's eyes had left her. My whole pack was at risk. I couldn't let Felix kill them all. What should I have done? Watch them die? She screamed, her breath heavy enough for Sarah to clearly hear her struggle to breathe from where she stood. Her attempt at being defensive was so vigorous that Sarah couldn't resist turning to look at her. In Sarah's opinion, she looked as if she'd collapse at any moment. Sweat was all over her face, her lips were wobbling, and her eyes were pricked with tears. If Sarah didn't resent her at first sight, then she probably would have felt sorry for her. But why was she behaving like this anyway? It's not like Damon was going to kill her or anything. If anything, he'd probably embrace her. Wait, is that the reason why she was acting so pitifully? To gain his pity? Sarah couldn't help but narrow her eyes into a glare. That conniving She held that thought when a hand grabbed her arm and yanked her to the left in one swift motion. Startled by the abrupt action, a loud gasp left her lips. Before she could recover from the shock, Damon pushed her behind him and stepped in front of her. Sarah's eyebrows drew together. What was he trying to do? Protect her? But from what? This course of action was definitely not what she expected. He was supposed to shove her away and run over to Katie's side without a second thought. But right now, he was protecting her? The thought drew forth a smile on her lips, but she should have known better. Of course, Damon wasn't some stupid nitwit who would return to a woman who betrayed him. That was just plain dumb. Widening her smile, Sarah was about to make it known that she wasn't hurt one bit, but before she could, a loud, thunderous snarl ripped through the air. Blinking, she reached out and caught a pinch of his sleeve in her hands. Her heart was beating a mile a minute, but she stepped forward anyway and ran her worried eyes over him. Damon? What's... Her words stopped when her eyes took in the sight of his face. His orbs were golden with streaks of hazel, which meant his wolf was also in control. But that wasn't what made her jaw slacken in surprise. It was the raw rage that devoured his whole face, and the way his fingers curled inwards to form claws as his nails elongated. That rage wasn't directed at her at all, but at Katie. And even so, fear still clobbered her. Damon was undoubtedly going for the kill. I'm sorry, but I didn't have a choice. Katie's voice filled the air again. If I didn't do it, my family would die. I knew for a fact that even if you lost the fight, he wouldn't be able to kill his own brother. Anyone would have done what I did. So you've been breathing the same air as me all this time. Damon's voice was laced with nothing but rage, and with one crook of his neck, he took his first step towards her. How dare you! You think I had it easy? I wasn't roaming around the world eating ice cream and fucking around with some lowlifes. She glanced at Sarah when she said that. I've been rotting in Maxim's dungeon all this time. It was only a few days ago that I got to see sunlight. Back then, I thought you'd understand. Her first tear slipped down her face. I thought you'd eventually come rescue me, but while I've been rotting away in Maxim's dungeon, you were here with another stupid mate. Lucky you. I didn't exactly get a second mate. When Katie shot her words at him, Sarah saw it. The way he wavered, the way he stiffened for a second. The realization made a stab of pain erupt in her chest. This wavering could only mean that she had gotten through to him. Somewhat. Why did you come here? Did you think I wouldn't kill you? I'll rip you limb from limb. Damon said those words, but Sarah knew that it was a lie. His nails had already retracted, and the rage in his eyes had lessened considerably. Katie shook her head. "They're after me, Damon. The rogues. Even if you don't kill me, Maxim will never let me live after I killed his son and fled." Tucking her black hair behind her ear, she took a shaky step closer, then another and another. "You loved your brother more than anything. What would you have done if he was the one in danger? Forget all that he did and think about it. I'm sure you would have done the same. And if I didn't make that choice, you wouldn't be the Alpha King right now. If anything, you should be thanking me." Sarah agitatedly fiddled her fingers and stood silently in place. Seeing as she was daring enough to step forward, it was obvious that she had realized that she was getting through to him. "Please help me, Damon." Katie dropped to her knees when she neared him and creeped towards his feet, her hands slowly moving to grasp his pants. The look in her eyes showed pure fear. Fear that even managed to tug at Sarah's heartstrings despite her dislike for her. With that being said, imagine how badly she was messing with Damon's emotions. He looked down at her. His hands by his side were visibly shaking. His shoulders were tense, and his aura screamed nothing but indecision and uncertainty. The obvious turmoil that he was going through made another twinge of pain erupt in her chest. If she thought about this rationally, then right now, Damon was in a more problematic spot than she was. His mate coming back to seek refuge here after betraying him 10 years ago. His mind was probably close to exploding. Yet she was here, thinking of herself and the problems that lied hereafter. Right now, the future didn't matter. What matters is the present. And that meant that she needed to fix this situation, as well as Damon. Even though he might hate Katie, there was no doubt that he'd feel remorse if she ever ended up dying out here. With that in mind, Sarah pressed a palm to her chest and breathed in slowly as she tried to muster up the determination to convince him. But she was saved from the arduous task when Damon moved his eyes away from Katie and turned his head to look at her. His eyes were finally looking as how she expected. Those orbs were calculative and filled with uncertainty. It was as if he was deciding on whom to choose. That immediately made Sarah feel lightheaded. Between the two, there could be no comparison. She won in everything, every single thing. "Get out!" At first, Sarah was certain that he was talking to her. But then, his head abruptly snapped towards Katie, and he coldly gestured to the door with his chin. "Get out, before I kill you myself." "No, please, I can't die now." Katie held his jeans tighter as she pleaded her heart out, her eyes bleeding with tears of desperation. "I know where their hideout is. This won't only benefit me. As soon as they're out of the picture, I'll leave." She glared at Sarah resentfully for a split second while she sniffled on the floor. "If you want me to." The hatred in her eyes was the same as the hatred in Damon's eyes when she freed Maxim. Sarah was obviously the one whom she wanted out of the picture. That much was obvious. But aside from that, anyone could tell that she wasn't faking her fear. She was definitely in trouble. And after having noticed that, Sarah's conscience wouldn't allow her to leave her to die. But then again, the choice wasn't exactly hers. Even if she said something, it wasn't a must that Damon would consider her words. He was the only one who could lend a helping hand. So then the question is, will he save her or leave her to die?